Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about the question, can photographers do videography? And I think this is a pretty common question that comes up. I've seen a lot of photographers that then are asked to do videography or see an opportunity to expand their services to videography. And I see this especially in the wedding industry. In corporate as well, but especially in the wedding industry, I see this a lot, is wedding photographers will be booked up and they'll see that they're doing really well with their photography wedding services, and they see an opportunity to expand into video as well and start offering that. Now, a lot of photographers are very talented, and there's a lot of skill and technique that does go into photography. But I would say that photography and videography are a lot more different than people assume. I get this a lot with clients. A lot of clients ask for both photo and video, and though we do have the capability to provide both of those services, they're actually quite a bit different. And so today I want to go over what some of those main differences are that maybe you haven't thought about. Maybe you're a photographer that's looking to branch out into videography. Maybe this can just give you a bit of a heads up into what you can expect if that's something that you're looking to do. The first thing I want to talk about is movement. Unlike photography, where you're simply looking to capture a single frame, video is meant to be an ongoing set of frames that are stitched together. It's technically 24 frames within 1 second. And so not only are you looking to capture a single frame that's visually pleasing, but you're wanting to add movement to it. Sometimes within a single shot, you'll have multiple frames. You'll pan from one frame to another. Or maybe you start with a wide shot and you dolly in or track into then having a close-up of your subject. And not only is movement something that you'll have to deal with, but it's actually something that you want to incorporate, because that's what makes video different. That's what makes it dynamic. And so you want to find ways to incorporate motion. Either you want your subject to have motion, or you want the camera to have motion, or ideally you have both. And so that is why oftentimes with videography, you'll see shots being handheld, or you'll see them on a gimbal or some sort of stabilization and moving around subjects or through spaces, is because that's what gives video life. That's what makes it dynamic, and that's why we have motion pictures and not just still frames. This is one of the most common errors that I see when photographers transition to film, is that they just keep the camera steady. They lock it off on a tripod and call it a day. But that's not what you want to do with video. It's very different than photography in that way. You're actually wanting to accomplish the opposite of photography. Instead of capturing a moment, you want to capture a story. And so that's the main difference. And for any photographers, you want to make sure that you're utilizing stabilizers, you're maybe going handheld for certain moments, you're getting up in the action, finding ways to incorporate motion to exaggerate the story or exaggerate the motion that's being told. The second piece is sound. Obviously with photography, this isn't something that you have to deal with. Your only deliverable is a still image or a series of still images. And so audio is something that you never have to deal with as a photographer, but as a videographer, this is an intricate part of your job. 50% of film is audio. So if you're a photographer, this is a skill you're going to have to learn. Not only capturing audio, but adding audio in post, understanding music and how that's going to affect your story. And so do not underestimate this. Don't think that you're just going to be able to learn this overnight. It actually is a skill that takes time to learn, and make sure that you have this under your belt before you start offering video services, because it is a crucial part of the process. So make sure that you understand audio recording, how to get the best results. If you're recording a wedding, make sure that you invest in some good audio equipment, some lavs, a field recorder that you can plug into whatever system that they have at the venue. Pieces like this are really what is going to elevate your film and make sure that people can clearly understand the words that are being spoken. Make sure that you understand adding sound effects in post, having ambient background noise or practical effects. And then also adding music and pacing into your film as well is going to go from amateur to professional. The third aspect is story. And I wouldn't say that photographers don't have experience with this. I think it is very challenging to create a story within one frame, and that is what photographers often do. Sometimes they have experience creating a portfolio or a set of photos, and that they're creating a story amongst 3 different or 4 different still images. And that in and of itself can be a challenge. And that actually gets you, I think that's a good reflection that can kind of bring you into the world of film, is thinking along that process of how do you take 3 different shots and have them tell a story together, because that's what film is doing. You're taking several shots and you're using them and you're editing them together to create a story. Now, the difference is that when you're doing that with video in comparison to photo is, one, you're using a lot more shots and they all have to cohesively be able to be told together. And on top of that, you also need to make sure that they are going to edit well together. Unlike photos that you can just put beside each other and people can individually look at them and appreciate each photo, with editing, people are going to see those in succession, and if you don't have shots that are going to cut together nicely, it's going to be jarring for the viewer watching. And so you want to try to avoid, or at least be intentional if you do use them, with match cuts or jump cuts. And that's why with videography, you kind of have to expand beyond that world of, a lot of photographers like to shoot on one lens and they have their 50mm and that's what they shoot everything on, or a 35, and that photographer swears by their 35mm lens and they shoot everything on it. You don't really have that luxury with film, because you need to get such a variety of shots to edit together. You need to make sure that you're getting a variety of wides and mediums and close-ups and big wide aerial drone shots and macro shots. And when you get that variety, then it makes your life a lot easier as an editor to stitch those together, because your image isn't going to be as jarring when you're cutting between them. Not only that, but it also enables you to just tell your story better. You can capture these little moments and pieces to really accentuate your story, from going from a wide to a medium to a close-up or vice versa. That gives you a lot of creativity in the editing room to be able to tell your story. Your deliverables will also require a lot more of a story than deliverables for photography will. For photography, yes, maybe you're telling a story within a portfolio, or maybe you're telling a story within a single image. But with video, the job is literally telling a story. And within, if you have a 3 to 4 minute deliverable, or even if it's a, 45 or an hour and a half documentary, you need to tell a story through that and be able to hold people's attention through that whole film. And so you need to really understand story arc, storytelling, writing, scripting, and what pieces that you need to capture. And that is really going to make a difference in your overall deliverable that you give to your client, or that you post on YouTube, or that you deliver to Netflix or whatever platform it's going on. It requires story, and that's what your viewer is going to be looking for. They don't just want pretty images, they want something deeper than that. They want emotion, they want story, they want something to follow along with. And so from a photographer's perspective, coming to videography, that is going to be a shift. You need to learn that mentality, make sure that you're putting story first, and make sure that you're capturing content that when you edit it together, it really will be telling a story arc, whether it's corporate work or weddings or feature films or documentaries. It really doesn't matter. Story is the bottom line. The fourth thing is shutter speed. Unlike photography, shutter speed is not something that you really want to vary that much in film. In photography, shutter speed can creatively be used. Maybe you use it at 1/500th of a second to make sure that you're freezing your image, or you lower your shutter speed to something like 1/40th or 1/30th of a second, and that's allowing you to have trails of movement, so you actually see motion within that still frame. So it's used creatively in that aspect, but a lot of the time it's used even just to control your exposure. With video, you don't have that luxury. Shutter speed in photo compared to video is different, and here's why. The same way that in photography, shutter speed controls the motion in your shot. And typically you're wanting to avoid this with photography because you want your images to be crisp and you don't want them to have motion blur in them. Sometimes creatively you do though. With videography, you usually always want motion blur and a particular amount of motion blur because when you have a series of shots moving in succession, what sells that it's moving is the motion blur. That's what makes it look natural. So if you're shooting at 1/5000th of a second, it's going to look really bad and jarring in video. Whereas with photography, you can shoot that and it'll look great. And so with video, you need to be way more particular about your shutter speed. And there's actually a rule that's developed for this in film, and it's called the 180-degree rule. This simply means that if you're shooting in shutter speed, so 1/50th, 1/100th of a second, if that's the toolkit that you're measuring it with, then your shutter speed needs to be double your frame rate. And so if your frame rate is 24 frames a second, then your shutter speed needs to be 48. If you're shooting in 60 frames per second, your shutter speed needs to be 1/120. And so this is very, very different. If you come from a photography background, you're not used to this. And on professional cinema cameras, they actually don't let you even use shutter speed. It actually is only measured in shutter angle. So you'll have your shutter angle be 180 degrees, and then it will automatically compensate for whatever frame rate you're shooting at. So in RED cameras and some of the other high-end cinema cameras, you only have this option. They don't even let you choose shutter speed. And so photographers may completely not be used to this at all. In a lot of DSLRs that have video capabilities, you'll still be able to use shutter speed. And so you just want to remember this rule, make sure that you're doubling your frame rate. That's typically what you want to shoot in. Occasionally, like I said, you'll creatively make a decision to not use that rule. Often you'll see this if you want a dreamlike sequence, then maybe they'll shoot with a lower shutter speed. And so you get more motion blur and it seems a little bit more flowy in your images. The other side is if you want it to be a little bit more jarring, and you'll often see this in action scenes, and it'll crisp up the movement and the action so you can see it a little bit better. There's not as much motion from frame to frame. So one, it just makes the action easier to see, and two, it makes it feel a little bit more like you're in it, and it feels fast-paced because there's not as much blur with that motion. Next, we have consistent lighting. This is still something that is typically used with photo shoots in studios or controlled environments like that. But more often than not, when you're shooting video, you need controlled environments. Even if you're shooting with natural light, the reason why you need your lighting to be so controlled is because often when you're shooting film, it's not just a still frame. And so you need it for a period of time. You don't want your lighting changing on you throughout that scene or throughout that shot. And so you need to make sure that you're in control of your lighting, how bright it is, the quality of it, all those things, because you're shooting with a team, you're shooting with a crew over a few hours or even for a full day. And that lighting is going to be changing throughout it. Where the sun is in the sky is going to be changing. And so you want to be in control of that. And often you'll have to work around this really creatively in the film industry. And you're meticulous with your schedule to make sure that you're getting the right time of day for certain shots, make sure that you have enough time of day with those shots, and then really utilizing giant lighting modifiers, bringing in heavy duty lights to replicate sunlight. Tricks and tools like this are widely used within the film industry because of that fact that they need to have daylight when it's actually pitch black outside or vice versa. And so many of the shots that you see in your favorite movies are fake. The lighting that you see in it is completely fake. They're shot in studios or they're shot on location, but at night or during the day, and they're faking it. And they have, giant black sheets blocking out sunlight, or it's night and they have giant lights that are peeking through the windows, replicating sunlight, and it's all fake. It's all fake most of the time. And so that's something to keep in mind as a photographer is you're gonna have to pay a lot more attention to lighting. Gone are the days where you just come in with a flash and you're just lighting up the existing space or using natural light, every photographer's favorite light source. You can't do that all the time with film, and there, with weddings or run and gun shoots, there's going to be moments where you do have to utilize that. You do have to work with what you have. But for anything long format, when you're doing interviews or narrative pieces or documentary content, sometimes you're going to really have to be creative and fake your lighting and find ways to make it look good, even though the lighting is nothing like what you want. My next point is that post-production is so much harder with video than it is for photo, and the reason being primarily is because your shots are moving now. With photography, you can use the healing brush. You can get rid of a lamp that's in the background that is ruining your composition. You can soften things up really easily. You can apply gradients and filters, and it's pretty easy because it's a still image. It's not moving on you, so wherever you put your filter, it's staying there. With video, that becomes a challenge because it's all moving, especially when you have your camera moving, your subject's moving. This is really challenging now. How do you color grade and bring your shots to life when they're moving on you and your target, you're literally trying to grade a moving target. And there are tools available for this, but it takes way more time than with photo because now when you apply filters, you have to track them to your subject or to where you want them in frame. If you do blemish removal, like spot removal type stuff in video rather than photo, now you have to track that to your subject and make sure that frame by frame it's not moving around on you, because that's gonna be a huge tell that it's fake. And so it's a lot more complex to grade in post for video versus photo. Another piece to that is when you shoot on DSLRs for photo, pretty much every camera is shooting RAW, which gives you a lot of flexibility in post as far as your colors and your exposure. When you shoot in RAW with photo, you can take that exposure slider and put it almost anywhere in your image. This is an exaggeration, but almost anywhere and your image will look great. You can take a shot that's incredibly underexposed and bring it to the right exposure, and with a little bit of noise recovery or noise reduction, it'll look pretty good. With photo, you don't really have that luxury most of the time if you're looking at the same price point of camera. RAW does exist for video, and it's an incredible feature. And it's starting to become a little more prevalent on cameras like the Blackmagics. Even Canon's brought it into some of their DSLR format cameras or mirrorless cameras. But for the most part, historically, even now, if you're getting cameras like that to get that raw video capability, it's gonna cost you a lot more than it would for the equivalent for a photo camera. RAW just is expensive when it comes to video, and that's just because file sizes for it are hard to do. And you're also capturing multiple frames every second, unlike a photo where it's click, you've captured your raw image. In 1 second, you're capturing 24 frames. And so to do that in a RAW format for video is quite challenging. You need to make sure that there's a good fan system within your camera, that it's cooling the camera down. Otherwise you get issues like the R5 where it's overheating. RAW just is a beast for video, and it's hard to do. And so often you'll only see it in these higher end cameras, especially cinema cameras. And so often you're not getting that same access to RAW capability. And if you do, it's just gonna cost more, end of story. Next is storage solutions. Again, you're capturing 24 frames in a second, sometimes 60 frames, sometimes 120 frames in a second. And so that's very different than photo. Even if you're shooting raw photos, which are larger than JPEGs, obviously, that still isn't a lot of space. Like, it's kind of a joke to videographers, like how easy it is for photographers for storage. Because for video, if you're shooting a wedding and you're only shooting 1080p and it's not in RAW, you're probably looking at 250 gigabytes for a single wedding. If you're shooting on something like what I purchased, the Red Komodo, if you're shooting 6K RAW at its highest output level, its HQ setting, guess how long that's gonna last you on a 512 gigabyte card? That's gonna last you half an hour. That's huge. Those are huge file sizes. Very, very different than photography. And so you need to find out very serious storage solutions for that. I'm talking about RAID drives, I'm talking about NAS, I'm talking about having pretty large SSDs to edit off of so that you can edit fast enough. I'm talking 2 terabyte SSDs, 4 terabyte SSDs, which are very, very pricey. It's a lot different than photo in that way. So it just comes at a higher price point. Video just does come at a higher price point, especially when it comes to storage. And so I would encourage you, if you're a photographer, make sure that you have that figured out before you really start incorporating that into your work, because if you don't have a solution right now, you're gonna have to find one pretty quick. And that just leads me into my final point, which is price point. That videography just does cost more. And like we talked about, storage is a huge component of that. Cameras is a huge component of that. Again, to get really high quality cameras, they cost way more than photo cameras do. If you're gonna get the most expensive photo camera out there, like if you're gonna get like the 1DX Mark III or something like that, which is a pretty high-end photo camera, that's gonna cost you what, 6-7 grand Canadian? If you're looking at the most expensive film camera, you're looking at ARRI Alexas or Reds. Reds, you know, you're looking at 40 grand. Just the brain of it. That doesn't count everything that you need to actually start getting the camera operating. Alexas, you know, Alexa Mini, 70K right there. And so these are really, really expensive cameras to get your hands on. And I'm not saying that you have to get those cameras to do film. There's obviously DSLR options, mirrorless, a lot of stuff out there that is at a lower price point, but I'm just saying, if you're comparing high-end photo to high-end video, video is gonna cost you way more at the end of the day. And it doesn't just stop with the camera. That's the thing is, with photography, yes, you have soft boxes and you have maybe a flash, and there's some other accessories that you'll probably need to buy to do high-end photography. And I'm not trying to downplay that, those are expensive purchases. But you do need to make a lot more of those expensive purchases for a camera. Again, if you're getting a high-end camera, usually it's just the body costs an arm and a leg on its own, and then you need to rig it out. So then you're needing to get, you know, accessory handles to be able to stabilize it, or you need an actual stabilizer as far as a gimbal or a Steadicam or something like that. Then you're needing a monitor to actually see your image and be able to reference what you're actually looking at. Use false color, all these different tools on it. And then you're looking at, you know, tripods, you're looking at constant lighting, and you're needing a lot of lighting. You can't just, you know, get one flash and call it a day. You're typically getting lighting modifiers, you're getting point source lights, you're getting LED lights, because simply to light up one scene, sometimes you're using 5 different lights. On top of that, you're needing storage solutions, you're needing polarizers, ND filters, all of that just to get good images. And so the entry point for film is just a lot higher. So if you're a photographer looking to get into film, just make sure that you have money set aside to be able to actually spend some money to invest in some serious gear for it. Because it's so much more than just the camera itself to be able to provide good images for video. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what it's like to go from photographer to videographer. That's just a little bit of what I've seen myself taking photos compared to taking videos, as well as seeing a lot of people in the industry make that transition themselves, and just hearing feedback from them, and just visually being able to see, you know, what it costs and what it requires for those people to take that step and that leap. Don't let that discourage you. Like, video is more expensive, and I'd say that it's more challenging to get into. But it's an awesome field to be in. One, it's just, you get to be so creative with it. It's amazing to be able to create and craft stories and craft beautiful images with amazing movement through it and lighting. And I'd say that it pushes you in some ways that maybe photo can't. And also there's lots of work out there. You can charge well for video. Don't be discouraged by it. Yes, it is a high entry point, but you also are able to charge, because it's a higher entry point, a higher day rate or half day rate or whatever it is that you charge. And so just let this be something that opens up your eyes to some of the things that come along with video, just to have a heads up, but no way let it be something that, you know, holds you back. Let it be something that just educates you a little bit as to what you need to actually step into that world. But hopefully you take that step, start to learn videography and dive into that world, because it's a very, very exciting one to be a part of. So hopefully this has been valuable to you. If you found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel. That helps me to know that you guys want to see this content and helps me make more videos. And so go ahead and do that. I'll see you in the next one.